Hi everybody and welcome back to story time. I hope you've had a lovely Thursday. The sun's been shining again. I hope you've been working hard, getting on with all the different tasks and challenges that your teachers have been setting for you. We're going to carry on with Gangster Granny today and we are up to chapter 12, The Love Bomb. So if you remember, Ben had just told his parents that he wanted to become a ballroom dancer in order to cover up the real truth that his granny was a jewel thief. So chapter 12, The Love Bomb. Ben had spent the whole of Sunday morning being measured up by Mum for his dance outfit. She had stayed up through the night sketching possible designs. Under duress, he was forced to choose one and pointed a limp finger at the one that he thought was the least hideous. Mum's hand-drawn options ranged all the way from the embarrassing to the humiliating. So for example, we've got one called the fruit cocktail, thunder and lightning, the hedgerow and badger, eggs and bacon. But the one that Ben thought was the least worst was the love bomb. So you see there, he's got trousers and a waistcoat covered in hearts. "We will have to find you a nice young girl to partner with for the competition," said Mum excitedly, as she accidentally ran one of her fake nails under the sewing machine and it exploded. Ben hadn't thought about dance partners. Not only was he going to have to dance, he was going to have to dance with a girl. And not just any girl, but a revoltingly precocious, sparkly, fake-tanned, leotard-wearing, over-made-up one. Ben was still at the age where he thought girls were as appealing as frogs born. "Oh, I'm just going to dance on my own," he spluttered. "A solo piece," exclaimed Mum. "How original." "In fact, I can't stand here talking all day. I'd better go and practice," said Ben as he disappeared upstairs to his room. He shut the door, turned on his radio, and then climbed out of the window again and raced over to Granny's bungalow on his bike. "So you were running off into the woods when Lord Davenport started shooting at you?" Ben was eagerly prompting his granny. But for the moment her mind looked blank. "Was I?" said Granny, looking increasingly befuddled. "That's where the story ended last night. You said you had snatched the ring from the Davenport's bedroom and were running across the lawn when you heard shots." "Oh, yes, yes," muttered Granny, her face suddenly illuminated. Ben smiled broadly. He suddenly remembered how he'd used to love his granny telling stories when he was younger, transporting him to a magical world. A world where you paint pictures in your mind that are more thrilling than all the movies or TV shows or video games in the universe. Only a couple of weeks ago, he had pretended to be asleep to stop her telling him a bedtime story. Clearly, he'd forgotten how thrilling stories could be. "I was running and running," continued Granny breathlessly, as if she was actually running, "and I heard a shot ring out. Then another. I knew from the sound that it was definitely a shotgun rather than a rifle." "What's the difference?" asked Ben. "Well, a rifle shoots one bullet and is more accurate, but a shotgun sprays hundreds of little deadly balls of lead. Any idiot can hit you if they fire a shotgun in your direction." "And did he?" said Ben. His smile had faded now. He was genuinely worried. "Yes, but luckily I was far away by then, so I was only grazed. I could hear the dogs barking too. They were hunting me and I was only a small girl. If they had caught me, the hounds would have ripped me to shreds." Ben gasped in horror. "So how did you get away?" he asked. "I took a chance. I couldn't outrun the dogs through the forest. The fastest runner in the world couldn't. But I knew the woods really well. I used to play in them for hours with my brothers and sisters. I knew if I could just get across the stream, then the dogs would lose the scent." "How come?" "Dogs can't follow a scent across water, and there was a great oak tree just on the other side of the stream. If I climbed that tree, I might be safe." Ben couldn't imagine his granny climbing stairs, let alone a tree. She had lived in her bungalow ever since he could remember. More shots rang out through the darkness as I ran towards the stream, continued the old lady, and I stumbled in the gloom of the forest. I tripped on a tree root and fell face first into the mud. Scrambling to my feet, I turned round to see an army of men on horseback, led by Lord Davenport. They were carrying flaming torches and holding shotguns. The whole forest was lit up with the fire from the torches. I jumped into the stream. It was around this time of year, in the depth of winter, and the water was icy. The cold shocked me and I could hardly breathe. I clapped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. I could hear the dogs getting nearer and nearer, barking and barking. There must have been dozens of them. I looked behind me and I could see their sharp teeth gleaming in the moonlight. So I waded across the stream and started climbing the tree. My hands were muddy and my legs and feet were wet, and I kept slipping down the tree trunk. I frantically rubbed my hands on my nightshirt and began to climb again. I scrambled to the very top of the tree and stayed as still as I could. I heard the dogs and the army of Davenport's men follow the stream down to a different part of the forest. The dogs' ferocious barks became distant, and after a while the torches were just specks in the distance. I was safe. I shivered up in that tree for hours. I waited until dawn, slid down the tree and made my way back to our cottage. I crept into bed and lay there for a few moments before the sun rose. Ben could picture everything she described perfectly in his mind. Granny had him utterly spellbound. "Did they come looking for you?" he asked. Well, no one got a good enough look at me, so Davenport had his men search everywhere in the village. Every cottage was turned upside down to look for the ring. "Didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to. I felt so guilty, but I knew if I owned up I would be in deep trouble. Lord Davenport would have had me publicly flogged in the village square." "So what did you do?" "I swallowed it." Ben couldn't believe his ears. "The ring, Granny! You swallowed the ring?" "I thought it was the best way to hide it, in my stomach. A few days later it came out when I went to the toilet." "That must have been painful," said Ben, his bum wincing at the thought. Passing a big diamond ring out of his bottom didn't sound in any way enjoyable. "It was painful, excruciating in fact," Granny grimaced. "The good thing was that our cottage had been searched already from top to bottom. Not my bottom. The bottom of the cottage, I mean. And if Davenport's men had moved on to searching the next village. So one night I went off into the woods and hid the ring. I placed it where no one would ever look, under a rock in the stream." "Clever," said Ben. But that ring was only the first of many, Ben. Stealing it had been the biggest thrill of my life, and as I lay in bed each night, all I dreamed about was stealing more and more diamonds. "That ring was just the beginning," continued Granny in a low whisper, staring deep into Ben's innocent young eyes. "That ring was just the beginning of a lifetime of crime." Chapter 13. A lifetime of crime. Hours passed in what seemed like minutes, as Granny told her grandson how she had stolen every one of the dazzling items spread out on the living room floor. The huge tiara had belonged to the wife of the President of the United States of America, the First Lady. Granny told Ben how, over 50 years earlier, she had sailed all the way to America on a cruise liner to steal it from the White House in Washington, and that while sailing back home, she had robbed every rich lady on the ship of her jewels. How she was caught red-handed by the captain of the ship and escaped by diving overboard and swimming the last few miles of the Atlantic Ocean back to England with all of the jewellery hidden in her knickers. Granny told Ben that the sparkling emerald earrings that had been in her little bungalow for decades were worth over £1 million each. They had once belonged to the wife of an enormously wealthy Indian Maharaja. The old lady recounted how she enlisted the help of a herd of elephants to steal them. She had coaxed the elephants to stand on top of each other to form a giant ladder so she could scale the wall of the fort in India where the earrings were kept in the royal bedchamber. The most amazing tale of all was how she stole the enormous deep blue diamond and sapphire brooch that sat sparkling on her worn living room carpet. She told Ben that it had once belonged to the last empress of Russia, who ruled with her husband the Tsar before the Communist Revolution in 1917. It had for many years been under bulletproof glass at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year by a platoon of fearsome Russian soldiers. This theft had required the most elaborate plan of all. Granny had hidden in an ancient suit of armour in the museum, which dated back hundreds of years to the time of Catherine the Great. Each time the soldiers looked the other way, she would edge forward in the metal suit a few millimetres until she got close enough to the brooch. It took her a week. "What, like Granny's footsteps?" asked Ben. "Exactly, young man," she replied. Then I smashed the glass with the silver axe I was holding and grabbed the brooch. "How did you escape, Granny?" "That's a good question. Now, how did I escape?" Granny looked flummoxed. "Sorry, it's my age, boy, I forget things." Ben smiled supportively. "That's okay, Granny." Soon the old lady's memory seemed to come back into focus. "Oh yes, I remember," she continued. "I ran outside into the courtyard of the museum, leapt into the barrel of a huge cannon and then fired myself to safety." Ben pictured this for a moment, his granny in deepest, darkest Russia, flying through the air in an ancient suit of armour. It was hard to believe. But how else could this little old lady have come to have such an astonishing collection of priceless gems? Ben loved Granny's daring tales. At home, Ben had never had stories read or told to him. His parents always just switched on the television and slumped down on the sofa when they got home from work. Hearing the old lady talk was so exciting. Ben wished he could move in with her. He could listen to Granny all day. "There can't be a jewel in the world you haven't stolen," said Ben. "Oh yes, there is, young man." "Hang on, what's that?" "What's what?" said Ben. Granny was pointing behind Ben's head, an expression of horror on her face. It's... "What?" said Ben, not daring to turn around and see what she was pointing at. A shiver ran down his spine. "Whatever you do," said Granny, "don't turn round." Chapter 14. Nosy Neighbour. Ben couldn't help himself and his eyes darted towards the window. For a brief moment he saw a dark figure wearing a strange hat peer through the dirty glass and then quickly disappear out of view. "There was a man peering in the window," said Ben breathlessly. "I know," said Granny, "I told you not to look." "Shall I go and see who it was?" said Ben, trying to hide the fact that he was more than a little bit frightened. Really, he wanted Granny to go out and see who it was. "I bet it was my nosy neighbour, Mr. Parker. He lives at number 7. He always wears a pork pie hat and he keeps spying on me." "Why?" asked Ben. Granny shrugged. "I don't know. I imagine he has a rather cold head or something." "What?" said Ben. "Oh no, not his hat. I mean, why does he keep spying on you?" "He's a retired major and now he runs the Neighbourhood Watch scheme in Grey Close." "What's Neighbourhood Watch?" asked Ben. "It's a group of local people who keep an eye out for burglars. But Mr. Parker just uses it as an excuse to spy on everyone, the nosy old git. I often come back from the supermarket with my bag of cabbages and see he's hiding behind his net curtains, spying on me with a pair of binoculars." "Is he suspicious about you?" said Ben, more than a little panicked. He didn't want to be thrown into jail for aiding and abetting a criminal. He didn't really know what abetting meant actually, but he knew it was a crime and he knew he was too young for prison. He's suspicious about everyone. We have to keep an eye out for him. The man is a menace. Ben went over to the window and peered out. He couldn't see anyone. Ring, ring! Ben's heart missed a beat. It was only the doorbell, but if they let Mr. Parker inside, he would see all the evidence the police would need to send Ben and Granny straight to prison. Don't answer it, said Ben as he ran to the middle of the room and started stuffing all the jewels back in the tin as quickly as he could. What do you mean, don't answer it? He knows I'm at home. He just saw us through the window. You answer the door and I will hide the jewels. Me? Yes, you. Hurry. Ring, ring. Ring, ring. This ring was more insistent. Mr. Parker had left his finger on the buzzer for even longer. Ben took a deep breath and walked calmly through the hall to the front door. He opened it. Outside stood a man in a very silly hat. Don't believe me? This is how silly his hat was. Yes, said Ben in a squeaky high voice. Can I help you? Mr. Parker put his foot inside the bungalow so the front door couldn't be closed on him. Who are you? He barked. He had a very big nose, which made him seem even nosier than he was, and he already seemed extremely nosy. Because he had a big nose, he also had a very nasal voice, which made everything he said, however serious, seem a little bit absurd. But his eyes shone red like a demon. I'm Granny's friend, spluttered Ben. Why did I say that, he thought. In truth, he was in a terrible panic, and his tongue was running away with him. Friend, snarled Mr. Parker, pushing open the front door. He was stronger than Ben, and soon forced his way inside. I mean grandson, Mr. Parker, sir, said Ben, retreating back towards the living room. Why are you lying to me? He said, taking several paces forward as Ben took several paces back. It was as if they were dancing the tango. I'm not lying, cried Ben. They reached the living room door. You can't go in there, yelled Ben, thinking of the jewels still scattered all over the carpet. Why not? Because Granny is doing her naked yoga. Ben needed a dramatic excuse to stop Mr. Parker barging through the door and seeing the jewels. He was pretty sure he had hit the jackpot as Mr. Parker paused and furrowed his brow. Sadly, the nosy neighbour was not convinced. Naked yoga? A likely story. I need to talk to your grandmother right away. Now get out of my way, you nasty little worm of a boy, he said as he shoved the boy aside and opened the living room door. Granny must have heard Ben through the door, because when Mr. Parker burst into the room, she was standing in her bra and knickers in a tree pose. Mr. Parker, do you mind? Said Granny, in mock horror that he had seen her in a state of undress. Mr. Parker's eyes spun around the room. He didn't know where to look, so he fixed his glare on the now bare carpet. Excuse me, madam, but I need to ask you, where are those jewels I saw a moment ago? Ben spied the silver Jubilee biscuit tin poking out from behind the sofa. Surreptitiously, he edged it out of view with his foot. What jewels, Mr. Parker? Have you been spying on me again? Demanded Granny, still in her underwear. Well, he spluttered. I had a good reason. I was suspicious when I saw a young gentleman enter your property. I thought he might be a burglar. I let him in through the front door. He might have been a very charming burglar. He might have weaseled his way into your confidence. He's my grandson. He stays every Friday night. Ah, said Mr. Parker triumphantly, but it's not Friday night. So you can see why my suspicions were raised. And as head of Grey Close's neighbourhood watch, I must report anything suspicious I see to the police. I've got a good mind to report you to the police, Mr. Parker, said Ben. Granny looked at him curiously. Whatever for, said the man. His eyes narrowed. They were now so red, it was like there was a fire in his brain. For spying on old ladies in their underwear, said Ben triumphantly. Granny winked at Ben. She was fully clothed when I looked through the window, protested Mr. Parker. That's what they all say, said Granny. Now get out of my house before you are arrested for being a peeping Tom. You've not heard the last of me. Good day, said Mr. Parker. With that, he spun on his heels and left the room. Granny and Ben heard the front door slam behind him, and they ran over to the window and watched him scuttle back to his bungalow. I think we frightened him off, said Ben. But he'll be back, said Granny. We have to be more careful. Yes, said Ben, more than a little alarmed. We'd better hide this tin somewhere else. Granny thought for a moment. Yes, I'll put it under the floorboards. OK, said Ben. But first, Granny. Yes, Ben? You might want to get dressed. Chapter 15. Reckless and Thrilling. When Granny had put her clothes back on, she and Ben sat down on the sofa. Granny, before Mr. Parker turned up, you were telling me that there was one jewel you never stole, Ben whispered. There is something quite special that every great thief in the world would love to get their hands on. But it's impossible. It just can't be done. I bet you could do it, Granny. You're the greatest thief the world has ever known. Thank you, Ben. Perhaps I am. Or rather was. And stealing these particular jewels might be every great thief's dream. But it would just be, well, impossible. Jewels? There's more than one. Yes, my dear. The last time anyone tried to steal them was 300 years ago. A Captain Blood, I believe. And I'm not sure the Queen would be pleased, she chuckled. You don't mean... The crown jewels, yes, my boy. Ben had learned about the crown jewels in a history lesson at school. History was one of the few subjects he liked, mainly because of all the gory punishments they used to have in the olden days. Hanged, drawn and quartered was his absolute favourite, but he also liked the breaking wheel, being burned at the stake, and of course a red-hot poker on the bum. Who doesn't? At school, Ben had learnt that the crown jewels were in fact a set of crowns, swords, sceptres, rings, bracelets and orbs, some of which were nearly 1,000 years old. They were used when a new king or queen was crowned, and since 1303, the year, not the time, they had been kept under lock and key in the Tower of London. Ben had begged his parents to take him to see them, but they had moaned that London was too far away, even though it wasn't that far. To be honest, they never really went anywhere as a family. When he was younger, Ben used to listen in silent wonder to his classmates as they recounted their myriad adventures in show and tell. Trips to the seaside, visits to the museum, even holidays abroad. The knot in his stomach would tighten when his turn came. He was too embarrassed to admit that all he had done during the holidays was eat microwavable meals and watch TV. So he would make up stories about flying kites and climbing trees and exploring castles. But now he had the greatest show and tell of all time. His granny was an international jewel thief, a gangster. Except if he showed or told this, the old dear would be put in prison and they would throw away the key. Ben realised that this was his big chance to do something crazy and reckless and thrilling. I can help you, said Ben in a cool and calm manner, even though his heart was beating faster than ever. Help me do what? Replied the old lady, a little befuddled. Steal the crown jewels, of course, said Ben. So we're going to stop there today, children. Tomorrow we'll carry on with chapter 16 called N-O spells no. I hope you enjoyed listening to the story today, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. If you're in school tomorrow, then I'm looking forward to seeing you in the morning. Have a good night. See you soon. Bye.